Hello, friends, and welcome back to my series on the Sacred Book of John. My name is Dr. David Litwa, and we are nearing the end of our long journey. We're in a section of the Sacred Book called the Little Catechism. And in this little catechism, John, the Apostle John, asks 7 questions dealing with the salvation of the human race. And in these questions, we have dealt with the first 6, and we are now on the 7th question, which will recommence and kickstart the final conclusion of the narrative, which regards the topics of fate and the flood. I said, "Lord, where did the counterfeit spirit come from?" Then he said, "The first ruler knew that they," meaning Adam and Eve, "surpassed him in the height of their wisdom, and he wanted to control their judgment. But he was ignorant. He did not know that they were wiser than him." When John asks whence the counterfeit spirit comes, Jesus takes the opportunity to recommence his retelling of Genesis. Before the little catechism, Jesus commented on Genesis 4, and now he skips to Genesis 6, the flood story. It might seem then that the counterfeit spirit comes into existence at the deluge. In fact, however, this spirit has already been introduced several times in the narrative. For the author of the Secret Book, the flood narrative rather explains how the counterfeit spread like a virus among the human race. It's hard to avoid seeing a contradiction between the statements that the first ruler, meaning Yaldabaoth, knew that they surpassed him in the height of their wisdom, and that he did not know that they were wiser than him. I take this as another sign that the editors of this book did not always harmonize their sources, probably because they were not willing to correct them. Wiping out humankind with an apocalyptic disaster, a great flood, well describes the desperate plans of a threatened tyrant. Yaldabaoth resembles a dictator whose last act before overthrow is to detonate his entire nuclear arsenal. The authors of the Secret Book rewrite the Noah story such that the ark, as we will find out, is unnecessary. They will allegorize the flood, saying that it does not consist of water, but of darkness. He, meaning Yaldabaoth, took counsel. He fathered fate. He bound the sky gods with measures, times, and seasons, along with angels, demones, and people, so that each one would come into the chain of fate, and so that it would be made Lord over all. Now, there's a lot of scholarship that wants to connect fate with the stars, and certainly in antiquity, that was a common association. But in this passage, if we just look at the text itself, it seems that fate is above the star gods and is the force which compels both humans and sky gods to be bound in the chain of time, referred to by measures, times, and seasons. And so angels, demones, and planets are subject to fate as much as human beings are subject to fate. So fate is that force of time, and the sky gods are the instruments of that time. And it is described as a chain, as it was commonly in Stoic philosophy, a chain of cause and effect in which all material events were predetermined by the influences which compelled them, or rather compelled certain outcomes, so that, as a result, this fate, which the Platonists spoke of as a lower providence, was made lord over all. Fate, we might think of it, is just another name for the regime of Yaldabaoth. It's another countermeasure to entrap human beings. It isn't identified with the counterfeit spirit. The counterfeit spirit is related to fate, but they are not the same thing. So even though John is asking about the counterfeit spirit, Jesus is taking a little bit of a diversion or tangent and explaining fate before he gets to the story of how the counterfeit spirit became dominant among the human race. The last point I should make is that although you might hear that in antiquity there was an age of anxiety in which people felt trapped by fate, it is often the case that when you read the sources, the people who talk about the chain of fate are talking about those people who are other than them who are trapped by this chain. The human spirit, or the spirit that is endowed with gnosis, is not, in fact, chained by fate, because fate is only the realm of material causation and does not affect the human spirit at all. So, so-called Gnostics, or let's just call them the writers of this text, are not expressing anxiety over being controlled by fate. They are condemning a world of materiality that is in the chain of fate, while celebrating the fact that they are free. And so we come to the actual narration of the flood, according to which Yaldabaoth grieved about what had happened. On this account, he took counsel to manufacture a great flood upon the whole mass of human beings. If this sounds like Genesis, it is Genesis, but Genesis rewritten. Interestingly, the rewriting involves a reordering, whereas in Genesis, the Daughters of Men episode occurs before the flood. The Secret Book of John puts it after. We'll get to this in due course. Between the flood and Christ's coming, humans are kept from remembering their providence. The one grieving is Yaldabaoth. And if you open up your Bibles, Genesis 6:6, this is exactly what Yahweh does. He's sad and he repents. That is, he changes his mind. And he changes his mind about allowing humanity to live. Now, in Genesis, Yahweh is grieved at the injustice and violence of human beings as a result of the daughters of men engaging with the sons of God. But in the secret book, that event hasn't occurred yet. And the cause of Yaldabaoth's grief is that he cannot control the luminous insight or the divine spirit inside human beings. And he is grieved at the fact that humans are wiser than him, and he cannot control or dominate their spirit. And this motivates him to engage in the first act of genocide. The greatness of forethought, or providence, also known as insight, took thought. She manifested to Noah. He preached to the people who did not believe him. It was not like Moses said, that they hid in an ark. Rather, they hid in a place, not Noah alone, but other people of the immovable family. I think that readers of the Secret Book should take comfort in the fact that even in antiquity, the story of Noah's Ark was recognized as irrational and mythic, and many allegorists and intellectuals rejected the account. Here we see an intellectual doing just that. Instead of Noah entering the ark, Noah and the redeemed hide in a place we will learn that is bathed in a cloud of light. What seems to be going on is that the ark, namely the boat, is being associated with, allegorically, with the Ark of the Covenant, which was said on several occasions to be covered with a cloud of light. At any rate, this location is the place where the redeemed hide, and they are saved from the, in effect, apocalyptic disaster that Yaldabaoth tries to invent for them. Noah here is not excoriated as a follower of Yaldabaoth. He is seen as a hero of Gnosis, a patriarch of Gnosis, who preached Gnosis in antiquity, and, as was traditional in interpretation by this time, he was not believed. And you can see this tradition already at work in 1st and 2nd Peter. So the race of the redeemed, or as I prefer to call them, the immovable family, is small, but they are significant and they are protected. We hear nothing about animals. We hear nothing about 2x2 or 7 pure animals coming into an ark. The sole focus is on humankind and the redemption of humankind. Providence protects the immovable family. They, meaning the immovable family, came into a place and they were hid by a cloud of light. They knew the Lordship on high, along with those with him. The light illumined them because darkness poured over every person upon the earth. Here again we see allegory at work. The allegory rejects the idea that there was a worldwide flood of water which was poured out on people over the earth to drown them. The real flood, according to the author of the Secret Book, is the flood of ignorance, here symbolized by darkness, poured over like water every person upon the earth. The death that Yaldabaoth unleashes is not a material apocalyptic disaster. It is a spiritual apocalyptic disaster of ignorance. People are not allowed to know the Lordship on high. And that is what condemns them. The redeemed, on the other hand, receive the light of illumination. Yaldabaoth took counsel with his angels. He sent angels to the daughters of people so that they would have children from them. These counsels pleased them. At first, they did not succeed. Yaldabaoth is the inventor of sex. He invented it in the heavens when he had sex with ignorance, or in other versions, madness. He raped Eve, and he inserted sexual desire into Adam. And now he unleashes the powers of sexual violence on a grand scale by sending his angels, aka his rulers, to have sex with the daughters of men to produce children. Children who would represent the stubbornness and hard-heartedness inflicted by the counterfeit spirit and counteract the luminous insight that had been bestowed upon human beings. And it is a testament to the strength of these women who were part of the immovable family that the ploy of sexual violence did not succeed. Like Noria in The Nature of the Rulers, they resist the forces of evil who attempt to rape them. When they did not succeed, they took counsel with each other to fabricate the counterfeit spirit in imitation of the spirit which descended. In this scene, which is a kind of divine council scene, as we have witnessed several times in the Secret Book, the angels plus Yaldabaoth come together to form their diabolical plan, and their plan is to fabricate the counterfeit spirit. And the reason why sex is the means is that this spirit is probably imagined to be conveyed through the semen of these angels. And so, in effect, they want to inject this semen, they want to inject this as a kind of virus into women. And at first, they do not succeed. So they resort to a new plan of deceit. The angels changed their forms into the likeness of their husbands. They filled them with the spirit they had within, a spirit full of evil due to vice. They brought to them gold and silver, gifts, bronze objects, and iron implements of every form and kind. Probably this ploy goes back to archetypes in Greek mythology. For instance, Zeus, in order to have sex with Alcmena, Heracles' mother, changes into the form of her husband Amphitryon, and this famous scene was played to comic effect in theaters all across the Greco-Roman world. So this idea of beings like Zeus, sexually voracious beings who are masquerading as gods, changing their forms into human males, imitating husbands, the husbands of normally virtuous wives. This is a kind of archetype that the author of the Secret Book is using. Interestingly enough, this particular idea also occurs in the Testament of Reuben, which is part of the larger, probably Christian work called the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, in which, according to the flood story, the way that the sons of God / angels have sex with human women is that they change into the likeness of their husbands. These women are so virtuous that they have to be deceived into thinking that they're having sex with their husbands in order to engage with these angels. At any rate, the outcome is predictable. They are filled with the spirit, a spirit full of evil due to vice, and it seems that the women are themselves affected, but in particular their children are affected. The children are not called giants as in the Enochic tradition, but they have that same stubborn hard-heartedness as the giants, and the women themselves are bedazzled with gifts of silver, bronze, and iron implements. So we have the origin of the war technologies as well as jewelry. But interestingly, unlike in the Enochic tradition in First Enoch, if you're familiar with it, the angels do not teach the women magic or root cutting or any other sort of arcane science. For whatever reason, that has been omitted, perhaps because the author didn't want to completely vilify these women who are more victims rather than active participants in this game of punch and counterpunch in the salvation history of human beings. They, meaning the angels, dragged them, the women, into distractions so that they gave no thought to their immovable providence or foreknowledge. These angels controlled them. They bore children from the darkness, from their counterfeit spirit. Then the angels closed their hearts. They became hardened from the hardness of the counterfeit spirit up until now. So that disease, which is native to ancient Israel, as we see throughout the Hebrew Bible, the Israelites are constantly accused of being hard-hearted or stubborn or stiff-necked. This is read as a parable of all humankind. All humankind infected by the counterfeit spirit has this stubbornness injected like a virus. These people, I take it, are not children of the damned. They are not automatically lost, but their stubbornness makes it hard for these humans to be saved in a single lifetime. As we talked about in previous episodes, there's a cycle of transmigration for most people. But it seems the case that in the course of salvation history, between the flood and Christ's coming, in general, humans are kept from remembering their providence or foreknowledge, which might be simply a reference to Barbelo here. But when Christ comes as a manifestation of Barbelo, he reveals the knowledge which dissolves the ignorance of the counterfeit spirit. Entirely ignored here is the history of Israel, because the history of Israel isn't really the story of salvation. The story of salvation for the authors of the Secret Book begins decisively with Christ. The history of Israel can be safely ignored.